I stood at Terminal 3 of the international airport, my new passport and boarding pass tightly gripped in my hand. 20 feet away, my parents were putting on a masterful performance, wiping away fake tears as they saw me off. In reality, they were waiting for the show to begin. They had massive debts to pay for my older brother's failed businesses, and they needed my salary. When I won a full-ride scholarship to MIT, they didn't celebrate, they panicked. After failing to stop me by burning my first passport, they escalated. Last night, they bought a burner phone and called the embassy and airport security, anonymously reporting that I was a radicalized extremist carrying contraband in my luggage. They thought I would be tackled by Homeland Security, stripped of my visa, and permanently banned from leaving the country, forcing me back into their house to work as their indentured servant. They didn't know that, as a cybersecurity major, I had long ago routed our home's Wi-Fi through a proxy server that logged every device's activity. I had intercepted the audio file of their anonymous VO LTE call, matching the voice prints perfectly to my mother. And they certainly didn't know that I had forwarded that audio file, along with the burner phone's MAC address and our home IP, to the Cybercrimes Division and the Federal Aviation Authority 6 hours ago. Over the intercom, a final boarding call echoed. 2 heavily armed airport police officers and a federal agent briskly approached our group. My mother smirked, stepping back to watch me get arrested. Instead, the federal agent walked right past me, grabbed my mother's wrists, and slammed the handcuffs shut. "You are under arrest for making a false terrorist threat in federal swatting," the agent announced. I didn't say a word. I just smiled, handed my ticket to the gate agent, and walked down the jet bridge to my new life, the sound of my parents' panicked screams fading behind me. 4 months earlier, I hadn't known any of this was coming. I only knew that I was sitting cross-legged on my bedroom floor at 11 at night, running a network security scan on a router I'd flashed with custom firmware 2 years prior, because it was the only hour of the day my parents didn't need something from me. I should explain what needed something meant in our house, because I don't think most people would understand it from the outside. I was 22 years old and had been the primary income for my family since I was 19. Back when a summer internship at a fintech startup turned into a part-time remote contract that turned eventually into most of a full salary. All of it funneled directly into a bank account my mother had insisted on co-managing for organizational purposes. I told myself for a long time that this was temporary, that once Kevin's landscaping business found its footing, once his food truck stopped hemorrhaging money, once his cryptocurrency venture stopped being a cryptocurrency venture, the pressure would ease and I could start keeping some fraction of what I earned for myself. Kevin was 26 and had never once in the years I'd been tracking it held a job longer than 8 months. He wasn't stupid, that was the maddening part, the thing that made it hardest to simply write him off as a lost cause. He was clever in short, brilliant bursts, capable of pitching an idea with genuine charisma, and then reliably, catastrophically incapable of doing the unglamorous daily work required to keep any of those ideas alive past their first difficult season. Each failure left behind debt, equipment loans, a business line of credit my father had cautioned without telling my mother, discovered only when the collections calls start. By the time I turned 22, the number my parents referred to only in hushed, evasive language, the situation, they called it, as though naming it precisely might make it more real, had crept past $90,000. I found out about the scholarship on a Tuesday afternoon in March. An email from the MIT Computer Science Department that I read 4 times standing in a campus hallway before I let myself believe it was real. Full tuition, a living stipend, a visa sponsorship letter attached as a formality, already prepared, already signed, as though the university itself understood that students like me sometimes needed every possible door held open before we'd trust it wasn't a trick. I cried in that hallway. Not quiet, composed tears, the full, shaking kind, the kind that comes from a place so deep you don't fully understand its size until it empties out of you all at once. I'd spent 4 years building toward this exact outcome in the margins of a life that belonged, in every practical sense, to other people. Coding at midnight after 10-hour shifts of freelance contract work, studying for exams on the bus between 2 jobs, watching every classmate around me complain about workloads I would have traded for in an instant, because at least their workload was entirely their own. I called my mother from that hallway, still crying, still certain, genuinely, stupidly certain, that this was the moment everything would shift, that a full ride to MIT was the kind of achievement so undeniable it would finally earn me the pride I'd spent my whole life quietly hoping for. There was a long silence on the line, long enough that I asked if she was still there. "MIT," she said finally, her voice flat in a way I didn't understand yet, wouldn't understand until I was standing in my bedroom 3 days later staring into a metal wastebasket. "That's in America." "Yes, full scholarship, Mom. Tuition, housing, everything. I don't have to pay a cent." "And what happens to us?" I remember the exact texture of that silence, the specific way my stomach dropped before my mind had even finished processing the sentence. Not congratulations, not I'm so proud of you. A question about logistics, delivered in a voice already narrowing toward something cold. "I'll still send money," I said, too quickly, already backpedaling, already performing the reassurance I could feel she needed before she'd even finished asking for it. "I can freelance remotely. It won't change anything." "It changes everything, Maya. You think American universities let you work 40 hours a week on the side? You'll be gone. You'll be someone else's problem the second you land, and we'll be sitting here with Kevin's debt and no income to cover it." Her voice climbed, sharpened. "Have you thought about anyone but yourself for even 1 second in this?" I hadn't expected celebration, not really, not if I'm honest about the particular shape of hope I'd been carrying. But I hadn't expected this either, the immediate, reflexive math of loss, calculated before the pride had even had a chance to arrive and be discarded. My father was worse in his way because his was quieter, a kind of cold, disappointed silence at dinner that lasted 3 full days, punctuated only by pointed comments about ungrateful children and families that didn't take care of their own. Kevin, when he heard, actually laughed, a short, disbelieving bark of a sound. "MIT," he said. "Sure. And who's paying our mortgage while you're off getting smart in Massachusetts?" I didn't argue with any of them. I'd learned, over years of trying, that arguing in that house never changed an outcome, it only extended the argument. I went quiet instead, did the thing I'd always done, which was absorb the disappointment and keep moving forward on my own timeline. Privately, the way you'd tend a plant you weren't allowed to admit you were growing. I filed the visa paperwork in secret, on my lunch breaks, in a campus computer lab where none of my family's devices could see my browser history. I told no one but my roommate-to-be, a girl named Preeti I'd met through an MIT admitted students group chat, who agreed to hold my acceptance documents and eventually my luggage at her apartment across town. Just in case. A phrase we both understood carried more weight than either of us said aloud. I came home on a Thursday in April to find my bedroom door already open, which was wrong immediately, viscerally wrong, because I'd started locking it the week after the scholarship email. My mother was standing beside my desk with an expression I'd never seen on her before, not anger exactly, something closer to grim, righteous purpose. The look of a woman who has convinced herself completely that what she's about to do is not cruelty but necessary correction. The metal wastebasket beside my desk had smoke curling out of it, thin and gray, rising toward the ceiling fan. I understood before I'd fully crossed the room. I knew before I looked. But I looked anyway, because some part of me needed to see it directly rather than simply believe it. The charred, curling remains of my passport, the photo page already unrecognizable. A corner of the deep blue cover still holding its shape at the bottom of the bin like a small, defiant flag. "You'll thank me one day," my mother said, not looking at me, already turning to leave the room, her voice carrying the particular serenity of someone who has just done something terrible and fully believes it was love. "This family needed you here. I did what I had to do." I didn't scream. I didn't cry, not in front of her. I'd learned that lesson 2 years earlier, that any visible cracking in that house only ever became ammunition. A story told later about how dramatic I was, how ungrateful, how difficult. I stood very still in my own bedroom doorway and watched the last threads of smoke curl toward the ceiling. Watched the corner of blue cardstock at the bottom of the bin finally collapse in on itself, and I felt something in my chest go quiet in a way I recognized even then as dangerous. Not despair. Not yet. But the specific, icy stillness of a person recalculating an entire strategy in real time. I waited until she was 2 rooms away. Then I closed my bedroom door, sat down at my desk, and opened my laptop. The State Department's expedited passport replacement service processed applications for victims of documented emergencies, theft, fire, loss in as little as 24 to 48 hours. For an additional fee I paid from an account my mother didn't know existed, one I'd quietly opened 2 years earlier with money I'd learned, slowly and expensively, never to let pass through her hands first. I filed the police report the next morning at a station 11 miles from our house, gave a flat, factual account of a household fire, accidental, because the truth that my own mother had burned it deliberately on purpose to keep me trapped was not a sentence I trusted myself yet to say out loud to a stranger in uniform without coming apart. That night at dinner, my mother watched me eat in silence and finally asked, almost gently, whether I'd come to my senses about MIT. Yes, I said, and made myself meet her eyes while I said it, made my voice flat and defeated in exactly the register she wanted to hear. I emailed them. I'm not going. She smiled. It was, I remember thinking, the first time she'd smiled at me in weeks. I smiled back, and underneath the table, my hand rested on my phone, where a confirmation email already sat unread in my inbox. Your replacement passport will be ready for pickup in 18 hours. The passport sat in a locked drawer at Preeti's apartment for 6 weeks, and I visited it the way you'd visit a secret you were afraid to name out loud, twice a week. Always with some plausible cover story, study group, library, a coffee I didn't actually want. I kept performing defeat at home with a precision that surprised even me. I stopped mentioning MIT entirely. I let my mother believe the smoke from that wastebasket had extinguished something in me alongside the passport, and I let that belief make her generous again, briefly, in the particular way she was only ever generous when she felt she'd won. I should have known 6 weeks of peace in that house was never going to hold. My father found the suitcase on a Sunday afternoon while I was at Preeti's, ostensibly borrowing textbooks, actually confirming my flight itinerary for the 4th time that week. The way you check a locked door you're still not entirely sure is locked. I'd packed it in stages over a month, a few items at a time, ferrying them across town in a backpack so the process would never produce a single suspicious trip. I'd thought I was being careful. I hadn't accounted for my father deciding, that particular Sunday, to look for a spare phone charger in the hall closet where I'd stored the last, nearly full suitcase behind a stack of winter coats. I came home to find both of them waiting in the living room, the suitcase already unzipped on the coffee table between them, my folded clothes and MIT orientation folder laid out like evidence at a trial I hadn't known I was standing for. You lied to us, my mother said. Not a question. Her voice had none of its usual performance in it, none of the wounded, righteous warmth, just something flat and furious, stripped down to its actual mechanism for the first time since I could remember. I filed for a replacement passport, I said. There was no point denying it anymore. The orientation folder alone made the whole architecture obvious. I'm still going, Mom. The scholarship doesn't end because you burned one piece of paper. My father stood up. He didn't shout, he'd never been a shouter, not exactly. His anger ran colder and quieter than that, which somehow made it worse. You would do that to this family, he said. Sneak around behind our backs, deceive your own parents. I'm 22, I said. I have a full scholarship to the best technical university in the world. I'm allowed to go. Not while you owe us, my mother said. And there it was, finally, spoken plainly instead of dressed up in the language of love and family obligation. You think you can just walk away from $90,000 because some school in America decided you're smart? Who paid for you while you were growing that brain, Maya? Who fed you, clothed you, kept a roof over your head for 18 years before you ever earned a cent? I didn't answer. There was no answer that would have mattered, not in that room, not with that suitcase sitting open between us like a wound. They didn't try to physically stop me from leaving the house over the following days, which I understand now was less restraint than strategy. They'd already realized, I think, watching me pack a second suitcase within 48 hours of the first one's discovery, that they couldn't lock a 22-year-old woman inside a house, couldn't burn a second passport before I'd learned to move faster than they could react. What I didn't understand, not yet, not until 3 nights before my flight, was how far they were willing to go instead. I noticed the anomaly on our home network at 11:40 on a Tuesday night, The way I noticed most things by then, not through instinct or suspicion, but through the flat, indifferent language of a dashboard. I'd flashed our router with custom firmware 2 years earlier, back during a cybersecurity elective that had taught me exactly how little most home networks actually protected their occupants. And I'd kept a habit ever since of running a weekly device audit, mostly out of professional discipline rather than any specific fear. That Tuesday, the audit returned a device I didn't recognize. A phone based on its traffic signature, connected for 11 minutes earlier that evening, sending a burst of data through a VoIP LTE call routed over our home Wi-Fi rather than cellular. A common enough choice for anyone trying to save on their data plan, except that this particular MAC address had never touched our network before, and had disconnected the moment the call ended, and had not reappeared since. I sat very still in my desk chair for a long moment, the cursor blinking over the log entry, feeling the specific, prickling unease of a person who has just noticed a detail too small for anyone else to register as wrong. I told myself it was probably nothing. A neighbor's phone briefly picking up our signal, a delivery driver's device pinging the network from the driveway. I told myself this for almost a full day, functioning normally, packing, confirming my flight, right up until Wednesday evening, when I overheard my mother's voice through the thin wall between the kitchen and the hallway, pitched low in the particular register she used when she thought no one could hear her. Tomorrow night before her flight. It has to be timed right, so there's no chance for her to explain herself before she's already at the gate. I stopped moving in the hallway. I didn't breathe. The embassy's fraud line, and separately the airport's tip line, both, so it looks like independent reports. That's what makes it convincing. I went back to my room and closed the door with a care that felt almost surgical, and I sat down at my desk, and I pulled the network logs back up, and I found the 11-minute anomaly from Tuesday night, and this time I didn't dismiss it. I traced it. Because I understood, with a cold certainty settling into my chest like something physical, exactly what I was about to find, and some disciplined part of my brain, the part that had spent 4 years building the exact skill set I was now about to deploy against my own parents, simply began working the problem methodical, precise, refusing to let the horror arrive until the evidence had. Our router cached fragments of call metadata for devices routing VoIP LTE through our network. Not the full audio by default, but enough packet data, if you knew how to reconstruct it, to recover a compressed but intelligible version of the call itself. It took me most of Wednesday night, hunched over my laptop with headphones in, running the reconstruction script I hadn't expected to ever actually need outside a classroom exercise, watching a progress bar creep forward while my hands stayed very still on the desk, and my heart did not. At 2:47 in the morning, the file finished rendering. I sat looking at the playback icon for nearly 5 full minutes before I let myself press it. My mother's voice, calm, unhurried, reading from what sounded like notes she'd prepared in advance. "I'm calling to report a security concern regarding a passenger on tomorrow's flight to Boston. My daughter. I have reason to believe she's become radicalized, she's been secretive, she's been in contact with people I don't recognize, and I believe she may be carrying something in her luggage she shouldn't be. I don't want anything to happen, I think someone should check before she boards." A pause, a second voice, official, asking a clarifying question I couldn't fully make out. "Yes," my mother said. "Yes, I'm certain. As a mother, I wouldn't call if I wasn't certain." I sat in the dark of my bedroom and listened to that recording twice more. All the way through, my own mother's voice. The same voice that had sung to me as a child, that had called me sweetheart at 100 dinners. I could no longer fully trust the memory of calmly, deliberately constructing a federal terrorism allegation against her own daughter, with the specific, chilling competence of a woman reading from a script she'd clearly rehearsed. I didn't cry. I want that understood clearly because I think it matters more than almost anything else in this story. I did not cry, not once, sitting in that dark room at 3 in the morning with my future reduced, in my mother's own recorded voice, to a threat that needed to be neutralized before it could cost her a paycheck. What arrived instead, slow and absolute, was a stillness I recognized from the day of the burned passport, except deeper now, wider. No longer confined to a single wounded moment, but spreading out to cover the whole shape of who these two people actually were, and had probably always been. Underneath every performance of love I'd spent 22 years mistaking for the real thing. I sat with that stillness for a long time. Then I opened a new document on my laptop, and in the top line, my hand steady, I typed a single header and began, methodically, to build the case that would end them. I didn't sleep the rest of that night, and I didn't need to. Adrenaline has a way of functioning as its own kind of clarity, and by the time the sky outside my window started turning gray, I had already done the thing I did best under pressure, which was build a system. The first priority was preservation. I understood, with the specific paranoia of someone who had just discovered exactly how far her own parents were willing to go, that any evidence sitting only on my laptop was evidence that could be deleted, confiscated, or destroyed the moment they suspected I'd found it. The same way a passport could become ash in a metal wastebasket in under a minute. I encrypted the reconstructed audio file and uploaded it to 3 separate cloud services under 3 separate accounts, none of them linked to any device that had ever touched our home network. I exported the router logs, timestamps, MAC addresses, packet captures, into a clean, chronological document, annotated the way I'd annotate a security incident report for a client, because on some level I understood that whoever read this next would need it presented like evidence, not emotion. I saved a copy to a USB drive and mailed it, that morning, priority overnight, to Preeti's apartment, the same place already holding my passport and my luggage. Because if there was one lesson 2 burned pieces of my future had taught me by then, it was never to keep everything precious in a single location. Only once all of it existed in triplicate, redundant, and untouchable, did I let myself feel anything resembling the fear that should have arrived hours earlier. It came in a single, brief wave, a shaking in my hands I hadn't let myself have at 3 in the morning, and then it passed, and underneath it was only the stillness again, patient and exact. I didn't go to the local police. I'd thought about it briefly, somewhere around 5 in the morning, and dismissed it almost as quickly. A burned passport was a domestic matter, something a local precinct might file and forget. But what my parents were planning was federal in scope, aimed at aviation security and international threat channels. And I understood I needed to meet that scope with an authority large enough to actually stop it before it reached the runway. I found the number for the Cyber Crimes Division's field office through the university's International Student Services page. A resource I'd never expected to need for anything more dramatic than a visa paperwork question. I called at 9 in the morning, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me, and asked, carefully, who handled reports of falsified federal security tips originating from a private residence. The agent who eventually returned my call that afternoon, Special Agent Diane Ferris, a name I would come to know very well over the following 2 days, listened to my entire account without interrupting once. And I could hear, in the long pauses between my sentences, the sound of someone typing quickly, taking this far more seriously, far faster than I had dared to hope. "Ms. Akaffer," she said when I'd finished, "I want to be very clear with you about what you're describing. If what you're telling me is accurate and the audio confirms it, your parents have committed multiple federal offenses, making false statements to federal officials, and depending on the exact language they used with the embassy, potentially a false terrorism report which carries extremely serious penalty. This isn't a family dispute anymore. This is a criminal matter and it's going to be treated as one." I sent her the audio file within the hour, along with the network logs, the MAC address, our home IP, and a timeline I'd built showing the burned passport, the police report I'd filed for it, and the 6 weeks of performed defeat that had followed. She called back 40 minutes later, her voice sharper now, carrying the specific urgency of someone whose afternoon had just been entirely reorganized around a single case. "We've cross-referenced the tip against active reports," she said. "There's an anonymous call logged with the embassy's fraud line last night, flagging a passenger matching your description on tomorrow's Boston flight. There's a second separate call to airport security's tip line, same flight, same passenger, different phrasing but identical underlying claim. Both calls originated from the same burner device. The MAC address matches what you sent us exactly." A pause. "Ms. Akaffer, do you understand how close this came to working? If we hadn't had your evidence ahead of time, you would have been detained tomorrow night, possibly for days, depending on how aggressively the initial report was worded. Your visa status would have been flagged pending investigation regardless of the outcome. This could have ended your admission to MIT entirely, independent of whether the claims were ever substantiated. I sat with that for a moment, feeling something colder than fear settle into the space where fear should have been. They knew that, I said. That was the entire plan. I believe you, Agent Ferris said, and something in her voice, brief and human beneath the procedural steadiness, told me she meant it specifically, personally, not just professionally. We don't take kindly to people wasting federal security resources on malicious personal vendettas, Ms. Acaffer, especially not against their own children, especially not dressed up as counterterrorism. The plan she outlined over the following hour was simple in its architecture, if not in its execution. I would proceed to the airport exactly as scheduled, exactly as my parents expected, giving no indication that I knew anything at all. My parents, she explained, would very likely want to be present at the airport themselves, not out of any residual affection, but because people who orchestrate this kind of trap rarely resist the urge to witness their own handiwork. Federal agents and airport police would be stationed nearby, monitoring the checkpoint, coordinated with aviation security to intervene the moment my parents' presence and behavior confirmed what the evidence already showed. The moment they revealed themselves as the actual threat, through proximity, through behavior, through the burner phone Agent Ferris was confident my father was still carrying, since disposing of it would have meant explaining its existence to my mother. And these two people had spent the last 22 years demonstrating an inability to trust each other with anything that mattered. The arrest would happen in full view, before I ever reached the checkpoint myself. I need you to understand this isn't going to be gentle, Agent Ferris said near the end of the call. It's going to be public. It's going to be exactly as dramatic as what they tried to do to you, except aimed correctly this time. Are you prepared for that? I thought about the wastebasket. I thought about my mother's calm, rehearsed voice reading from notes she'd prepared to end my future. I thought about 22 years of learning to make myself smaller, quieter, more convenient in a house where love had always, it turned out, come with an invoice attached. I've been prepared for this my whole life, I said. I just didn't know it yet. Then get some sleep tonight if you can, she said. Tomorrow, act exactly as though nothing has happened. Say goodbye to them however you'd normally say it. Let them believe, right up until the last possible second, that their plan is working. We'll handle the rest. I've been playing the good daughter for 22 years, I said, and I heard my own voice come out flat and calm in a way that would have frightened me a week earlier in a girl I no longer entirely recognized as myself. One more day won't be a problem. We left for the airport 3 hours before my flight, which was, I understood by then, exactly the kind of margin my parents would want. Enough time for a scene to unfold slowly. Enough time to watch it happen from a comfortable distance rather than being rushed through it. My mother had dressed carefully that morning. I noticed, in a soft cardigan and pearl earrings, the specific wardrobe of a woman preparing to be photographed looking devastated. My father drove in silence, both hands tight on the wheel, and I sat in the back seat with my carry-on against my knees and said nothing at all, because there was nothing left to say that wouldn't have given away exactly how much I already knew. I felt in that car a strange and specific calm I hadn't expected to have access to. Not numbness, I want to be precise about that, because numbness was what I'd used to survive the burned passport. And this was different, sharper, more awake. I watched the back of my mother's head in the passenger seat, the same head that had bent over a phone 2 nights earlier reading rehearsed lies to a federal fraud line. And I felt something almost like curiosity, clinical and distant, about how she'd managed to hold her performance together for 3 more hours. She managed it beautifully, I'll give her that. In the terminal, she gripped my hand and told me how proud she was, her eyes glistening with tears I now understood with total clarity were not for the reason she wanted me to believe. My father hugged me stiffly and said something about calling every week, about how much they'd miss me. And underneath the words I could see him scanning the terminal again and again, in the specific darting way of a man waiting for a scene he'd arranged to begin exactly on schedule. We stood near the security checkpoint, the 3 of us, my mother dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, my father checking his watch with a frequency that would have seemed like nothing at all if I hadn't already known what he was actually watching for. "You should get in line," my mother said, glancing toward the checkpoint, her voice bright with a cheerfulness that had a current running underneath it I recognized now for exactly what it was. Don't want you to miss your flight, sweetheart. I looked at her for a moment longer than I needed to. I let myself really look, at the pearl earrings, at the tissue pressed just so beneath her eyes, at a face I had spent 22 years trying to earn approval from. And I understood finally and completely that I was looking at a stranger who happened to share my blood, and that the daughter she'd raised me to be quiet, obedient, endlessly useful had died sometime around 3 in the morning 2 nights earlier, in a dark bedroom, listening to a recording that ended everything. I love you, Mom, I said, and I meant it the way you mean something you're saying for the last time, a closing of a door rather than an opening of one. She smiled at me, warm and radiant and utterly false, already glancing past my shoulder toward the checkpoint, already watching for the show to start. I turned and walked toward the security line. I didn't look back to see whether they were watching. I didn't need to. I heard it before I saw it, a shift in the ambient noise of the terminal. A ripple of attention moving through the crowd the way it always does right before something happens. Heads turning, conversations dying mid-sentence. 2 airport police officers and a man in a plain gray suit that somehow still read as unmistakably federal were moving through the terminal with the unhurried, absolute purpose of people who already know exactly where they're going and exactly what they'll find when they get there. They walked past me. I felt the specific, dizzying relief of that, of watching authority approach and pass over you entirely, headed for someone else after 22 years of bracing for exactly the opposite. Mr. and Mrs. Acaffer. The federal agent's voice carried across the checkpoint area with a flatness that silenced the small crowd around them almost instantly. I need you both to step aside, please. My mother's face, when I turned to watch, did something I will remember for the rest of my life. A fractional widening of the eyes, a stiffening at the shoulders. The specific expression of a woman watching her own carefully constructed scene collapse into a version she hadn't written. I'm sorry, she said, her voice climbing half an octave. Is there a problem? We're just seeing our daughter off. Sir, I'm going to need you to place your hands where I can see them. One of the officers had already stepped toward my father, and I watched my father's hand move instinctively toward his jacket pocket. Toward, I understood with a cold, distant clarity, the exact pocket where a burner phone would sit if a man were the type to keep it close rather than trust his wife to hold onto something that could end them both. We have a report, the agent said, his voice carrying easily now across a terminal that had gone almost entirely silent around us, of a false security threat called into both the embassy fraud line and airport tip line last night, targeting a passenger on the 4:40 flight to Boston. Both calls were traced to a prepaid device with a MAC address matching a phone recovered from your possession, sir, approximately 4 minutes ago, by security personnel who intercepted you at the parking structure. He held up an evidence bag, the burner phone visible inside it, and I watched my father's face go the color of the terminal's fluorescent lighting. You're both under arrest for making false statements regarding an act of terrorism and filing false reports to federal authorities. My mother's composure didn't crack so much as detonate. This is insane, she said, her voice rising into something raw and unrehearsed for the first time since we'd left the house that morning. We would never, Maya, tell them this is a misunderstanding. I didn't move toward her. I stood exactly where I was, my carry-on against my hip, and I watched the officer turn my father's wrists behind his back, watched the cuffs close with a small, definitive click that seemed to land somewhere in my chest as much as in the air around us. Maya, my mother's voice cracked fully now, aimed directly at me, stripped for the first time in my entire life of any performance at all. Maya, please, we're your parents. I thought about the wastebasket. I thought about the recording. Her voice reading from prepared notes, calm and certain, constructing a federal terrorism allegation against her own child with the same tone she'd once used to remind me to eat my vegetables. I thought about 22 years of invoices disguised as love. You called the embassy and told them I was a terrorist, I said, and my voice came out steady, quiet, carrying easily in a terminal that had gone entirely still around us. So I wouldn't be able to leave. So I'd have to keep paying for a life I never got to choose. I looked at her for a long moment, memorizing, I think, the last version of her face I would ever need to see. I'm not the one who did something insane, Mom. The officers led them both away, my mother's voice trailing behind them, high and pleading and finally honest. and I turned toward the security checkpoint without watching them go, because there was nothing left in that direction I needed. A woman in an airline uniform was waiting for me at the front of the line. Agent Ferris's doing. I would learn later. A quiet word passed along to expedite me through screening, to spare me the ordinary indignity of a crowded checkpoint after the extraordinary one I'd just survived. She walked me through with a gentleness that nearly undid the composure I'd been holding since 3 in the morning 2 nights earlier, and by the time I reached my gate, boarding had already begun. I found my seat by the window and watched the ground crew move across the tarmac below, watched the jet bridge detach, watched the whole apparatus of my old life recede below the wing as the plane lifted, banking slowly over a city that no longer had any claim on me at all. Agent Ferris called 2 days later, once I'd landed, once I'd unpacked the single suitcase that had survived every attempt to keep it from leaving that house, to tell me both my parents had been formally charged false report of terrorism, conspiracy, and interference with aviation security. Charges that carried, she said, a realistic likelihood of years, not months. Kevin, apparently, was already telling people it was all a misunderstanding, already asking around about who might Cassine a loan. I didn't call him back. I didn't call anyone from that house ever again. I sat at my new desk that first night in a dorm room that belonged entirely to me, and I opened my laptop. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, there was nothing on the screen I needed to hide, encrypt, or explain. Just a syllabus. Just a future, finally unmortgaged, entirely my own.